Yeah, it's on. Very good. So we can start our conversation and also the questions. And good afternoon, and good morning. And let's before we start, the three minor the points. The first, there's a great the book talking about the next 77 years was the higher education going. And the Schwarzman College will buy the book. And that's number 1 point. And also Tsinghua. So I'm not sure, but the Tsinghua library director was the former Schwarzman College dean, so Professor Wang. So I'll convince him to buy. So there's a number 1. So thank you. And the number 2, you talking about the 3 changes. That is very important. And also use the 5 examples. And if I were younger, 10 years, I would jump in either universities. It's very attractive. And there's Alden College of engineering, right? So there's a very very free, right? So you can do everything. They don't need to get a very high pressure for their tenure track, professor, anything. But the student really get the benefit, right? So it's like the Minerva and the travel around and online and offline. So experiential learning, right? So they're so great. And number 3, Schwarzman College, all of the university mentioned in your book, including last 5 you mentioned, all of these universities, the Schwarzman College, we have their students. Like Minerva, this cohort, we have 1, last cohort 1, and African Leadership University, we have 1, and all of them, I can tell you, they're very successful, high talent is so great. That means they're successful. That means that's a change you mentioned. It's very successful. And the Schwarzman College, our students can give you a proof. That's a great change. So thank you so much. Very good. So, and please give Professor Picku another round of applause. Thank you. The question, there are the audience may know the questions. They have a lot of questions. The first question is just wants to ask, so what's the challenge? And I know a lot of challenge. What's the number 1 challenge?
The number 1 challenge for, well, I'm going to mention 2.
Okay.
So because there's one to get
buy
started.
Buy 1, get 1 free. Okay.
There's 1 to get started, and then there's 1 to succeed. The number 1 challenge to get started is that higher education is different from other economic markets. In other markets, if you have a better product at a cheaper price, you succeed. That's not the case in higher education. And the reason that's not the case in higher education is because nobody quite knows what the product is. Nobody quite knows what is it, particularly in education. Research, a little clearer. But in education, it's hard to know what the product is. How do you know one student is better trained than another student, right?
It's a long-term
It's a long-term, right. And so people use proxies. And the proxy that is used in higher education is prestige, right? Oh, this school has a high ranking, it must be good. Well, what determines the rankings? Well, what other people think about it. So it's all about reputation and prestige. And when you start out, it's very hard when you don't have a brand and you don't have prestige. So the first thing these schools had to do was how to overcome that. And then the second challenge they face is they have these big, audacious visions. That's how they attract people. That's how they drive the energy. But sometimes they have to change course. And sometimes people who are good at coming up with great visions are not good at being flexible. And so the schools that have succeeded the best have been able to keep enough of the original vision, right? But also stay flexible. At African Leadership University, when Fred Swaniker decided that they were not going to build another 23 campuses, well, a lot of people, they'd signed up for that. They wanted to build the Harvard of Africa. And Fred had to say, we're not here to build campuses, we're here to train leaders. We need to do it in a more cost-effective way, and we're going to pivot. That led to a lot of people leaving the organization. So audacity and flexibility is the hardest trick for these entrepreneurs to balance.
That's great. Yeah. So we have to stay our mission and vision, but also keep that flexible, right? So because the world changed, everything changed. Yeah. So and also for the education is definitely different from the economic development, right? It's short term, long term. You can put them together, but education is only long term, long run. So you have to, it's 10 years, as you mentioned in your speech. It's 10 years at least. Then we can see the change is okay or not. I only can give you example of Schwarzman College, and evaluate your students is very good, right? But it's still short term, right? Yeah, so the leaders will see, the leaders in the future, right? Yeah, okay, thank you so much. And also, there's another question, you mentioned there's a low cost and high quality. So that's true. And but how can keep that sustainability for this the universities? This I know there's a good try and change, and today we can see there's a good trend. But how to make that sustainability?
Yeah, it's a huge question because in some ways the drive for lower cost has led to higher quality. Why? So I'll come to the problem in a moment, but it helps to step back. You might think lower cost, why would that lead to higher quality? Well, the reason it does is because it leads these academic entrepreneurs to have to think differently about things, right? So for instance, Olin decided they weren't going to have tenured faculty. They weren't, right? Now that means that they have more flexibility. They can count on the faculty to be more flexible and adaptive, and that there were enough faculty of high quality who were attracted to that, who wanted to do research but didn't want to be pulled between their research and their teaching constantly. And so the lower cost at places like Minerva and ALU led to coming up with much more inventive ways. At Minerva, if you look at most universities, there's a big catalog, right? There's thousands of courses. And it just sprawls. There's no control over it. You get approved by the course committee and you're in. And what Minerva figured out was, no, we need to have courses that connect to each other. So just because a faculty member wants to teach something, sure, sometimes we can do that. But in general, we need a smaller number of courses so that they can all be tightly connected to each other. The students still have choice, but the result is that the students get a more coherent education and the university doesn't have to staff 1 million different courses, right? So the parameter, in engineering, when you have parameters of design, it helps you to shape in creative ways. And the low cost really helped here. Now the challenge comes that, for instance, using Minerva again as an example, the challenge comes with when you're also trying to make sure anybody can have access to this. Mm-hmm. And Minerva, by offering this education originally at $10,000, now $30,000, drew the most incredible students from around the world. But it turns out those are needy students, and Minerva doesn't have an endowment built up over centuries. And so the sustainability problem becomes, it's hard to scale a single institution. And I think what I think what we're seeing is a kind of pluralism, which is to say, you get cost savings if you go to scale, but you can also simply have more experiments in more places around the world that can sustain themselves without always having to get big. So getting big is not bad, but it can compromise quality. And 1,000 pluralistic Minervas and Ashokas can, I think, be the equivalent of 10 giant institutions.
So the quality is still the number one consideration, right? And so for the traditional universities, that kind of education, there's a teaching, there's a research, and also think tank, like a policy provider. But for this kind of the universities, I mean the change of the universities, the new era universities, how to balance these three things? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a very fair question. So most universities have to do, there's the triangle, right? You've got research, you've got teaching, and you've got various forms of social engagement, whether it's technology transfer or public policy engagement or finding ways to serve society's needs.
Exactly.
And those issues have gotten only more demanding because the demands for research have gone up, right? The cost of research. The demands for better teaching have gone up. The demands, in many countries, universities get turned to solve all kinds of problems. We have childcare problems in the city. Can the university help, right?
Yeah.
These kinds of issues are very difficult. And I think that if you look at that triangle, you can look at any university, and it's very, very hard to maximize all three of those. In fact, at some places, it's hard to maximize two. And to some degree, I think that's okay. Not every university has to be simply a carbon copy of every other university. You can have, Arizona State University has done great work in improving their research in significant ways and in creating access for many more students at a low cost. They've also improved their quality. Now, I don't know that their quality is the same as Minerva's quality, but they're working on all three. And I think the challenge is when it comes to education, even the established universities can think creatively about, even when we have faculty that are very research focused, we still have an obligation to not put those faculty in the classroom who are just going to lecture. That should be malpractice, and it shouldn't be allowed. And they may not be the best teachers in the world, but they should not be the worst. And at the same time, you can incentivize and build cores of faculty, whether they have tenure or not, who are really leading and most engaged in students. So I think existing universities can get this balance. It's not going to be perfect at any one place, and many of the schools we ended up focusing on, Yale NUS and NYU Abu Dhabi, really balance, and Ashoka, high-quality research and teaching. The other schools made a decision that if you really want the highest quality of education, then you need to make sure people are not fundamentally focused on their research.
So great. Okay, very good. And also in your speech, you mentioned that's adaptability, right? So that's today is a lot of challenges, like you mentioned, this is technology and the AI and the big data. So that will absolutely impact the future's education. So there's online adapted already for the change, right? But so there's a rapidly change. So how do you think that's changed, the impact?
So I think there are two things going on there. One is structural, and one is educational. The structural part, let's talk about established universities, not new ones. So established universities can't do what a new university does, right? They already have departments and faculty and research and commitments. They're not, and they're doing great things, right?
A lot of negative as that.
Yeah, but they're you know, PKU, Tsinghua, Fudan, doing remarkable things. But our universities are themselves complete ecosystems of innovation. I think what established universities can do is try to give permission for some parts of the university to experiment, to iterate, to prototype. One thing I love about Olin is, and anyone who works in a university knows, you have a new idea and you have to get it all approved before you've ever tried it. And at Olin, you come up with a new idea and you get 2 years to pilot it. Because who knows if it's going to work? And after 2 years, you come back to get approval, right? And if you can give permission to faculty who want to iterate and prototype and experiment, you can create incubators on the campus to do that. And that has a demonstration effect because suddenly the students start coming to all those places and the other colleges start to notice that. So that's the structural part. I think the educational part is between AI and online technology, we have either a recipe for disaster or the kind of constraints that are going to actually power new educational innovation. So what do I mean by that? We know that AI is going to require students to learn much more authentic individual skills than they've ever needed before because AI will be able to do so much for them. So all those skills we talked about earlier are really underscored even more. Okay, but let's say you want to deliver this online. Well, the advantage of online is you can reach more people. It's more mobile, right? You could be doing an internship at CCG and taking a class in the afternoon and not have to, and say you're from Fudan and not have to fly back to Shanghai, right? There's lots of ways for a more mobile, flexible education. The problem is most of our educational practices are so bad that when we put them online during the pandemic, everybody saw it. They saw that courses didn't connect, that professors were boring, that there was no active learning, that students turned off their videos, right? It showed the emperor had no clothes. Our education systems were rotten. The foundation has rotted. So now that that's been exposed, the opportunity to do online is that you can bring much more intentionality. Okay, not professor, go into the classroom, close the door, and we'll never see. Let's give you some help to how to design an active, intensive, engaging, skills-based course that is not just your lecture notes from 50 years ago. And that way, online can power better education to keep up with AI.
So still can be engaged, right? Okay, very good. And you know, there's in Tsinghua, there's a former the president called the President Mei Yiqi, and he has a very famous the saying, and his university is not only about the building, it's about masters. And so you know, we'll have a change. So how to find the masters? You mentioned the teaching is so important, and the masters and the leading the professors. That's so important. But competitive the market of the world. How to find?
Well, let me see if I understand the question. To find, you know, I was at SUSTAC in Shenzhen last week, and I was a new university in China, 11 years old.
Yes, yes.
And I was struck by two things. One was how many of some of the best practices I talked about, they had tried to build in from the beginning. That they, as a new university in China, were really understanding experiential education, skills-based education, interdisciplinary education. There's a school of design there that really is doing enormously. I took a tour of the labs and the creative, it felt like being at Olin College doing engineering and design. So I think there's, that was fascinating. The other thing that was fascinating was the global strategy they used to recruit international faculty to come. So, right, their position, they're new. They can't compete with Tsinghua at the beginning. But they can get international professors, Chinese, non-Chinese, worldwide. There's a worldwide race for talent here, and they made opportunities for those faculty, and it lifted them up. And my belief is that universities are like cities. You know when you go to a place, if you go to a city and there's coffee shops on the streets and there's people buzzing around and there's energy and there's excitement, you feel creative. right? And if you go to a city and nobody's there or everybody's indoors or there's, right, then you don't get any energy back. And it's the same thing with universities, that some of the best researchers in the world want to be surrounded by other creative people, right? They want to be surrounded by a poet who's doing creative things, even though it's completely different from their work in engineering, because it's inspiring and it's engaging and it means that there's a whole cauldron and a culture there. And that can embrace, thank you, that can attract, I think. We think that you need to attract faculty, you need to just give them a lot of money. And that's true, let's be honest. You need to provide them labs. But ultimately, you give them that, and then they'll go somewhere else. Mm-hmm. So how do you create a university that's like a city that you never want to leave?
It's the ecosystem.
It's the ecosystem. And if I can say, China has opportunities here. That one of the great things about the U.S. system is it's very decentralized. Mm-hmm. So you can get some experimentation. But one of the terrible things about the U.S. system is when you actually get a good idea, nobody else adopts it, right? And China has, 600 new universities that have started in the last 20 years? In the last 20 years, 600 new universities in China. We've started a research project at the Institute for Global Higher Education at DKU to try to understand which ones of those are doing innovative kind of things here, which are imitating Western or other universities, and which are being more like WeChat and trying to leap ahead. And is it all 600? Is it only 6? We don't know, and this is an area of your knowledge, we'd love to talk with you. But that's where the opportunities to make systematic change are so much more possible here than it is in many other countries. If the change is real, I remember being in Shanghai at a conference put on by the Caoxing group with universities from all over China, and I was stunned. Every university stood up and said, well, we're doing Tongshe Jiayu. We now do general education. We're doing interdisciplinary. We're doing experiential. So everyone had got the message. What is not clear to me is how much it actually changed and where the universities are that are really excelling in that, and where are there ones where it's Tongshe Jiaoyu means that you're studying economics and you have to listen to a philosophy professor lecture to you, right?
Yeah, yeah, very good. So probably the last one, and then we can take the questions from the audience. And so you have taught a lot of students in the U.S., China, and across the whole world. And could you tell us, so what kind of the students you love most?
I love all my students. Okay. One of my students is here right now. Linda Zhang is from Tianjin. She came to Duke University. She graduated 2 years ago, 3. She went on to work for McKinsey. She is now the chief of staff to a new university, the Nigerian University of Technology and Management. It's a startup, and then she's on her way to Stanford Business School. And our plan is to keep building these universities. And this relationship that we've had for now almost 7 years was really driven by one thing. Agency.
Okay.
Agency. That what, well, I'm going to embarrass Linda here, but she is passionate about change, and she is motivated to want to learn outside. I've never had her in my classroom. We just worked on a series of projects that are outside the classroom and have led to reports, have led to publications, have led to new projects, have led to the presentation you saw today. She was the research assistant on this book. And what I saw at African Leadership University, for example, is they have their hashtag, their motto is do hard things. And they're trying to instill in their students, and I saw it in listening to these interviews with students, how a student can come in and not think they can compete, not think that they're there in Nigeria or Rwanda or anywhere in many parts of the world. How do I compete in this global world? Silicon Valley seems like it's a long way away, right? And do hard things. Pick a mission. Don't just pick a major. Really instills a sense of agency, and you see the students start to believe in themselves. And if they believe in themselves, and then we can give, and again, we didn't have a single class together. And yet, Linda's agency, her drive, my desire to engage, to mentor, to learn from her, has led to a 7-year collaboration. And that's the most exciting thing that any professor can have.
Wow, that's great. Congratulations. There's do hard things and pick out the mission and get the solutions. Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you so much.